Hello again, everybody. This is Kelly Corey, the Director of Graduate Programs here at Olivet, and also the host of our Courageous Leadership Colloquium. And our speaker right now is Mike Fales, who is the Director of Service Learning for the University of Olivet, as well as an Olivet College graduate. So he's been a part of the history for quite some time. Mike is going to share with us an idea that really has been in the fabric of the University of Olivet since the beginning. And so, Mike, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you to all of you for being with us this morning. Appreciate it, and excited to share with you one of my favorite topics, the history of the University of Olivet. Our homecoming is this coming Saturday here on campus, and I actually be celebrating with my friends the 50th anniversary of my graduation from Olivet. So this is a special year for us. I've been studying the history of this place since I was a student in the fall of 1971. And I've been fascinated by it. Back in those days, the archives used to be in two metal containers down in the basement of the historic part of Burridge Library. And for some reason, pretty strict librarians back in those days apparently saw that I took my study of Olivet history seriously, and they would give me a key and let me go down there and just do my thing. So I've always appreciated that, and I continue to study the history. I'm going to share with you some new research that I've done on one of the founders of Olivet, a man named Oramel Hosford, with you today. And let me get to my PowerPoint. So Olivet was founded as Olivet Institute originally because unfortunately the state of Michigan refused to give Olivet a charter when we applied for one in 1844 because they felt that the founding mission of the school was too radical. And so they weren't ready, even in a non-slave state like Michigan, to have a school that admitted women and students of color on an equal basis with white men in those days. So we were forced to operate as an institute, which would be the equivalent of a community college today, offering two-year degrees. But back in those days, in order to be a teacher or a preacher, you only needed a two-year degree. So there was a lot of education that went on here, even up until 1859, when Michigan finally begrudgingly offered us a charter so that we could operate as a four-year college. So Olivet was founded as a school that admitted women and students of color decades before this was common. It was explicitly founded to challenge slavery and other forms of inequality. So when people ask, why is Olivet out in the middle of a cornfield somewhere? Well, it's because the founders literally were persecuted for their beliefs. And so they founded this place in a place where they were removed from, they would say, the sins of the city, and were able to operate this place the way they saw fit rather than under the scrutiny of those who were less open-minded than they were. It saw an education as a tool of social justice and equal opportunity. Those were very early notions, particularly in the Christian world in the United States in those days, that would go on to change many things in this country in the later 1800s. And so Olivet literally helped change the world by creating a place that was different than what normal society would have been back in those days. I'd like to share with you a picture of our founder, the Reverend John J. Shippard, but unfortunately, Reverend Shippard was so pious that he felt that it was a sinful waste of time to pose for portraiture back in those days. So we don't have a picture of him. He is the co-founder of Oberlin College in Ohio, first college in the world to admit women to a four-year degree program, and we believe the first college in the United States to admit Blacks on an equal basis with whites. And then the founder of Olivet College here in Michigan, we believe the first college in the state of Michigan to admit Blacks and women to a four-year degree program, and very likely the first college from its inception to do so in the United States. Reverend Shippard grew up in a wealthy home in New York State. His father was a slave owner, not in Alabama or Georgia, but in upstate New York. One of the things that fascinates me about John Shippard is that he struggled in his early life to figure out where his leadership skills were and what his God-given talents were. He had an assortment of health issues. His father tried to set him up in the marble business in the state of Vermont, and that didn't go very well. So he realized that he wasn't really cut out for business, and then felt a calling to go into the ministry, and not just pulpit ministry, but particularly into the missions world. So back in those days, they had what were called homeland missionaries, people that would go out into the wilderness in the western part of the United States and open churches. And in this particular case, John Shippard wanted to open a seminary as well as a college. Unfortunately, our founder, Reverend Shippard, only lived for a very short time in the process of founding this school. He came here, found the location on a hilltop in south central Michigan, and had a religious experience of some sort that was so profound to him that he felt that he needed to move the location of the school to another location. They're on the table there. And decided to start Olivet here on a hilltop, and brought 39 followers with him from Oberlin, Ohio, arrived here in the dead of winter in February of 1844, lived in some makeshift log cabins, and then began to construct a school and a church. And unfortunately, in those days, much of southern Michigan was swampland, which meant that it was absolutely full of mosquitoes. And most of the people that were part of that early experience contracted a type of malaria. And because John Shippard's health was not good, he actually died in September of 1844, before the school was even open. So some people who were part of that founding party were so discouraged they went back to Ohio, but a few decided to stay behind. And what to do? So they wrote back to Oberlin and they said, send us somebody to help us get this place off the ground. And they sent two very young men. One of them was a man named Oramel Hosford, whose parents were missionaries and followers of John Shippard, were also rabid abolitionists. And they came, they sent their 23-year-old son here, who had just graduated from Oberlin, and asked him to help open the school. So Hosford, at the age of 23, came here with his wife and was given this enormous job of trying to build buildings and build a faculty and build a curriculum and get the school open. And somehow between September and December of 1844, he was able to pull that off and became our first professor here, who taught by candlelight in the log cabin in December of 1844. One of the things about Hosford that fascinates me is that he was obviously a man who was very generous and had a very generous spirit. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is the idea of leadership skills being shared in uncommon ways. So many people who study leadership go into the corporate world, into the nonprofit world, go into the social justice world, and devote their lives to various causes and for-profit and nonprofit corporations. And the thing about Shippert, or about Hosford rather, that's so amazing to me is that he had this enormous job to open the school, get it off the ground and running. But at the same time, he continued his studies for a Master's of Divinity, which is a terminal master's degree, somewhere between 80 and 90 hours. And in addition to having a PhD, he then completed his Master's of Divinity and became an ordained congregational minister. He remained an active abolitionist off campus as well as on campus. And then he was a husband and a father. And despite all of that, somehow found the time to share his skills with other people in other settings in ways that he thought would be helpful to society at the time. Out of his roots as a congregational minister, some of that comes. So Congregationalists come out of Puritan theology in England. And part of their belief system was that education was a hallmark in their movement, because what they wanted to do was purify the Church of England, because in those days, the kings and queens would appoint the second or third sons who didn't inherit the title and the money into clerical positions. And what people wanted were trained clergy who knew the Bible and understood the needs of their congregation. This was the very beginning of the social gospel movement here in the United States. That movement would go on in the later 1800s, probably coming out of the abolitionist movement into things like children's child rights, getting children out of the workplace and into schools, providing opportunities for people to elevate themselves in society, and trying to make the world a better place in general. Oberlin, where Hosford came from, was a hotbed of the abolitionist movement. In fact, I've read books where people say that in some ways Oberlin was so involved in that movement that it might have actually been one of the very causes of the beginning of the Civil War, because of their unwillingness to sit back and just let the system work as it was working back in the 1840s and 50s. As a minister, Hosford saw a moral and civic duty that was tied to forming upright citizens in a democracy. So in terms of his early involvement here at Olivet, and imagine at the age of 23, in addition to being a professor, a founder of the school, and a father, and back in those days, being a professor even meant housing students in your home. So I've looked at records here that of the times when the Hosfords were here, and over and over and over again in federal census data, it shows the Hosfords were housing students in addition to their own children in their home. And so Hosford, coming out of that, believed that education was a God-given right, that schools must be open to all without discrimination, and that in this newly formed state of Michigan, that we had the duty to provide free, quality, non-sectarian education to every child, whether they were Black or white, rich or poor, male or female. So what was the state of public education in Michigan in the 1850s? Well, the Michigan Constitution in 1835 established a state-supervised school system and called for a superintendent of public instruction. We were the first state in the nation to create such an office. This laid the groundwork for the 1840s and 50s reforms that came about, and then on to the 1860s, when Oramel Hosford was very much involved in that movement. By the 1850s, the state had a network of district schools, local one-room schools funded by property taxes and supervised by township officials. Each district was generally responsible for building its own schoolhouse. There were common schools in those days in the 1850s, and they were typically a mix of ages from the age of 5 all the way up to 18, where everyone was all taught together. Many more students on the lower end of the age group as opposed to the higher end, because people needed their teenage children to work in the fields because most of them were farmers in those days. The curriculum involved the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, plus moral instruction, geography, grammar, and sometimes history. Teachers were often very young, just like Oramel Hosford was a professor at the age of 23 in a log cabin. Sometimes many of the people that taught were so young that they were only a few months more experienced than those that they were teaching. Attendance in those days was irregular. Children often missed school during planting and harvest seasons. Teacher training was a major concern in those days because there was a lack of uniformity in the quality of teaching. As I said before, many had very little education and were just barely a little older than the students that they were teaching. So to address this, Michigan established what was called the State Normal School in Ypsilanti in 1852, which today would be called Eastern Michigan University. And it was one of the first teacher training colleges west of the Alleghenies. This was a big step toward professionalizing teaching in the state of Michigan. Higher education and libraries were on the minds of the founders of our state back in 1835. So they created the University of Michigan, which was actually founded in 1817, but then reorganized by the state government in Ann Arbor in 1837. And by that time was already gaining a reputation as a leading public university. Michigan also pioneered the idea of township libraries. Each township was required to use a portion of fines and school funds to purchase books for public use. By the 1850s, hundreds of these libraries existed across the state. And then in social context and the challenges that followed, funding, property taxes supported schools, but many communities struggled to raise enough money because there were so few people that were living and they were so scattered. Inequality between wealthier and poorer townships was very common. Access to education was mostly afforded to white children. Native American and African American children, even in the state of Michigan, a non-slave state, often faced segregation and very inferior schooling on reservations. And Michigan did not have compulsory education, and there were no laws regarding that until 1871. So actual participation varied widely, but there were no laws dictating that students in a certain age had to attend school and be there. So Hosford, a man of many talents and many gifts in leadership, helped change the world by creating a school that was different than society was in those days. Women were taught alongside with men on an equal basis. Blacks and whites were taught together on an equal basis. And in those days, people not only thought that that was wrong, many people actually thought it was a sin. People thought that educating women for anything more than reading the Bible and cookbooks was a sinful waste of time. So the people that founded this place, including Oramel Hosford, were really up against society as it was in those days. And if he wasn't busy enough doing all of that here in Olivet, he realized that there were other things that he needed to do as well. So one of the things is that he decided that the political system in the United States needed to change. And so Oramel Hosford was one of the founders of the Republican Party, which came directly out of the arguments about whether the growing United States should incorporate additional slave states or not. And the Republican Party was founded in Jackson, Michigan, and Oramel Hosford was one of the founders of that party. And then that party, of course, went on to elect Abraham Lincoln, and a lot of changes happened in our country as a result of that across the board. Not only did Oramel Hosford believe that the United States needed to change, he saw an opportunity to make a difference in the things that he learned about education here at Olivet for everyone, not just for the students of Olivet, not just for the congregants in a congregational church, but for everyone in the state of Michigan. And so in those days, the position called the Superintendent of Public Instruction, which today we would say is the equivalent of the Secretary of Education for the state of Michigan, now is an appointed job, but in those days it was an elected job. So Hosford had to learn the art of political science, and he, coming out of his helping to found the Republican Party, became a politician, ran for statewide office, and was elected the Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Michigan for 4 consecutive terms, beginning in 1861 through 1867, and served during a very dynamic period in the state's school development. His work built on the foundations laid in the changes that happened between the 1830s and 1850s, but he helped move Michigan toward a more modern, structured public school system. Amongst his changes, first was the expansion of free public education. So coming out of the idea that higher education should be open to all, he believed that public school education should be available for free to anyone, regardless whether they had the money to pay or not, which was also one of the founding principles of Olivet College in those days. Hosford strongly advocated for free public schools supported by taxation rather than tuition. So in those days, there were something called rate bills. They were fees that were charged to parents for each child. He pushed local school districts to eliminate those so that schooling could universally be accessible regardless of family income. Under his leadership, more communities embraced free schooling as a public good. He saw the need to strengthen teacher training. So as superintendent, Hosford promoted the state normal school in Ypsilanti, founded in 1852, as the centerpiece of teacher preparation. So isn't that interesting? He remained a part-time professor at Olivet College during that time, and of course, devoted his entire lifetime to this school, but yet had a heart that was open to the fact that Olivet wasn't the only school in Michigan and that there were other schools that needed promoting as well. And he was a huge promoter of the state normal school in Ypsilanti. He emphasized professionalization, higher qualifications for teachers, better pay, and the need for ongoing teacher institutes across the state. He believed in standardization and with that accountability. So he worked to strengthen school inspections and reporting systems so that districts had to submit data on attendance, finances, and facilities. This was part of building a more accountable, uniform statewide school system rather than leaving everything to scattered local districts. He believed in educational access even in places that were hard to come to, so rural schools. Hosford emphasized extending education to rural children in Michigan's frontier counties. Most of the population of the state was in the far southern part of Michigan in those days, and rural communities definitely were having a harder time creating schools and finding qualified teachers. He encouraged the construction of more schoolhouses and the establishment of libraries in townships, believing that books were essential to civic development. And I was surprised a couple years ago to see an article in a historic newspaper in Port Austin, Michigan, which is the tip of the thumb in Michigan, and it's a community that we do a lot of service work with our students. And this is the first school in Port Austin that is now part of the History Center there that we do a lot of service work with. And I discovered that Oramel Hosford went all the way to Port Austin in the 1860s to speak to the school board there about the need for teacher training and the need for standardization in the curriculum that they had. And that was a really hard trip to make because it would have been by stagecoach in those days and would have taken a very long time to get to. But he was so committed to those ideas that he felt that that was something that he had to do. He also was an advocate for equality of opportunity. So while education in his era was still segregated and not fully inclusive, Hosford's reports as superintendent stressed that public education should be universal and non-sectarian. He argued that the state had a duty to educate every child and prepare them for citizenship. I'm not sure what just happened here. Let me stop this and start again. There we go. And Hosford talked about in his writings at that time the equality of education, educational opportunity, and the need for that. So while working in the mid-19th century limits that were made only some things possible, Hosford insisted that public education is a right for all children within the state of Michigan and that non-sectarian instruction is essential. He frames education as not just vocational or useful, but as a component of democracy, citizenship, and moral culture. So in the overall context of that, Hosford served during the Civil War and Construction era. And in that climate, the role of public education in building civic virtue and preparing citizens was often explicitly invoked in the reports that he printed as the Superintendent of Public Instruction. His emphasis on free schools, on removing rate bills that charge tuition, reflects a broader national trend in the mid-19th century toward taxation support for universal schooling. The Normal School at Ypsilanti, founded in 1852, benefited from Hosford's attention. By promoting its graduates and expecting alignment with its standards, he helped elevate its status and impact. And by collecting data via inspections and reports and by recommending state courses of study, Hosford moved Michigan further away from entirely locally determined schooling toward a hybrid model of local responsibility, but with increasing state oversight and standardization. Hosford did his 4 terms, decided that he had done what he needed to do, returned to Olivet, and served here until he died in 1893. One of the beautiful testimonials to him is that the university restored his home here on campus, and it is a history center today and archives for the college, and is a beautiful memorial to him. Even after that time, Hosford became a trustee of what was called Michigan Agricultural College, which today would be Michigan State University, and other things outside of his involvement here at Olivet. And so I think the overall story I'd like to have you remember about Oramel Hosford is his his generosity of leadership, and realizing that he had skills that were not only good for his congregants as a minister and for his time here in the small school in the wilderness in Michigan, but for the benefit of people around the country, and particularly here in the state of Michigan. Any questions that I can answer for you?
Mike, thank you so much for investing your courage and your ideas and your joy and your hard work and your passion for the history of Olivet to our event and our lives. It was a valuable learning experience, and we can take that learning with us and hold in our heart the generosity of Mr. Hosford and all of the work that was done at the very beginning of the story of Olivet. So thank you very much. We are going to move into our next session. So we will be back with you in just a moment.